So this question here brings up a pretty good point, and I'm going to go over it now. What do we have here? We have object O is equal to this string, right? And so the first thing you should think is, well, O is an object, right? Type object, and this here is a string. So since both of these guys are objects, right? This is like lower on the hierarchy. This should be fine, right? And then we have B is type Boolean, and we say is O dot equals to this string, which they're not equal. So this is, returns false, and B is equal to false. And then here's where the problem is. It's like you're thinking, okay, well, object O2, right, a new object variable of type object, is equal to false, right? Well, false is not an object. False is a primitive data type, just like integer, just like float, just like char. So you're thinking, dude, this is gonna break, right? And then you look here and you're like, oh, wait a second, I'm taking an object and I'm typecasting them as type string. Wait a second, dude, there's like compile time errors everywhere. So it's obviously 3, right? It's obviously C. And you drop it into BlueJ, and you'll say, hey, why does it compile, right? And the reason why it compiles is because of Java has a set of wrapper classes, right? And I'm not sure if we covered this in the book, but you might be thinking, what are wrapper classes, right? Well, each of Java's 8 primitive data types, right? Int, char, right, to name a few, has a class dedicated to it, known as wrapper classes. All right. So if we have this int x is a primitive data type, right? It's type integer. We can wrap it in an object called integer, capital I, pre-built, right? Not user-defined. So you could drop that x right here into new integer and save it in an integer type of variable. Okay, and so what you might be like, tell me more about this integer wrapper class. Well, I guess we could start here. Well, no, I guess we could start here, right? So the integer wrapper class has these different methods associated with it. So I can run .toString on the integer object, right? And then I can run parse int on the integer object. I can byte value it, I can double value it, long value, and all these crazy things over here, right? I could do Boolean equals, right? If one integer object's equal to another integer object. So I could do all these cool things with it, and you might be thinking, like, why do we have an integer wrapper class, right? Well, we learned about arrays and sticking primitive data types into arrays. Okay, great, that's fine. Well, we learned about array lists, and we noticed that array lists only are able to take in objects, right? What if we wanted to create an array list of integers? We wouldn't be able to without like creating our own class, right? Basically what we would want to do is create our own integer class, right, that takes in integers and basically wraps it up as an object so that we can stick it into an array list. And that's one of the, for me at this point, that's the main purpose of having the integer class, is so that we can take a list of numbers, wrap them up into, create an integer object with them, and then stuff it into an array list. All right. And life gets easier because we can also have these different methods we can run if we have it running on a for each loop. Okay. And then we look at this chart over here, and we have object as a superclass of all classes in Java, right? And we have number as a subclass, a child class, and then we have all the primitive data types here as a child class of number. Right? And then here we have character as a child class of object, and Boolean as a child class of object. All right, great. So, okay, so we know about wrapper classes. Okay, cool, great. How does that apply to this, right? Well, there's something called, let's see. Excuse this gibberish here. There's something called auto boxing. or I think it's called auto wrapping, auto boxing, auto wrapping. I think it's the same thing. Maybe not, but let's call it auto wrapping. And so when it runs this line of code here, what's happening is that this string object, right? The strings are an object, right? Well, this string object is saved in this variable called object, called O of type object, right? And that's legal, right? That's legal. That's fine, because we could always typecast this O back to a string, and we get this string object, right? So this is fine. This is okay. This makes sense in our class hierarchy here, right? Because object is a superclass of all classes, and string is a class. Okay, great. And then we're here, and b is equal to false, and b is a Boolean primitive data type. We get down to here, right? And we have this object O2 variable that can hold values of type object. B is not an object. B is a primitive data type. It's a Boolean data type, right? But when you do this, O2 automatically wraps the primitive data type B into the wrapper class, the Boolean wrapper class. Boolean, right? So it does it automatically, does it for you. And so once this will run, it will run fine, and you could typecast this O2 from an type object to a type class Boolean wrapper class, capital B Boolean. And you can run Boolean's methods on it. You can, treat it like just a regular Boolean value. But what happens here when you set a variable of type object equal to a primitive data type, auto wraps it, right? So O2 contains the Boolean value false typecasted as an object, right? Which can be typecasted back down to type Boolean. Okay, it's called auto wrapping or auto wrapping. Okay, and then we're here, and this is fine. We talked about it earlier. This is typecasting the object, right, that contains a string, right? Just like in Heroes and Monsters, we had that map that was type object, and we stuffed it up with full of heroes and monsters and farmers and different classes, right? And we did that, and what happened is that the hero was typecasted as an object when we put him into the 2D array, right? The monster was typecasted as an object. The potion, whatever, the farmers, everything you put into that 2D array was typecasted as an object, right? It was like automatically typecasted as an object. So when we pulled it out, we had to typecast it back to being a farmer so that we can interact with it, right? So that's kind of what's happening here. We're typecasting this guy from being an object, right, to being what it originally was, string. So now t is equal to the string. Okay, great. That's fine. Now we get down here to the system print line of O2, right? What is O2? O2 has a data type of type object, right? And it is auto-wrapped as a Boolean in the Boolean wrapper class, right? This guy. And it's equal to false. So if we print line O2, well, the Boolean wrapper class has a toString method, right? Right here, this integer, these are all the ones for integer as an example. And integer has a toString, right? So it's going to print out false, its value. So this number 21 is number 2 for that reason, right? Yes. And you know what? I'm not 100% on what this print line is going to print out here. So that's why I'm kind of hesitating. Yeah, I'm not 100%, so I'm not going to talk about that. But yeah, wrapper classes, man. This is compilable code. It will work, and you definitely will be tested on this. 1 or 2 questions on the exam, at least.